HDR enhances colors and contrast, but sometimes it's best to disable it. Reasons include washed out colors in some applications, increased power consumption, or compatibility issues with older systems. This video shows you how to turn off HDR on your LG monitor using Windows, macOS, and the monitor's on-screen display. This is the most universal method for all LG monitors. Press the menu button or joystick on your monitor to access the on-screen display or OSD. Navigate to the Picture or Display settings in the OSD menu. Find the HDR or HDR Mode option and set it to Off or SDR. Confirm your changes. This method works on all LG monitors, regardless of your operating system. In Windows, right-click on the desktop and select Display Settings. This opens the Display Configuration window where you can adjust various settings. Next, click on Advanced Display to access more detailed options. In the Advanced Display section, find the HDR option. Toggle the HDR option to Off. This will disable high dynamic range for your display. Alternatively, you can install the LG Monitor Control app from the Microsoft Store or LG's website for direct HDR control. This provides more integrated system management. On macOS, the primary method to disable HDR involves navigating to System Preferences and adjusting display settings. First, open System Preferences from your Dock or Applications folder. Then, click on the Displays icon to access display settings. Within Displays, select the Advanced tab to reveal additional options. Locate the HDR setting in the Advanced options and toggle it to Disable. This will turn off HDR for your display. Here's what the Display Settings window looks like on macOS. Alternatively, you can use LG's on-screen control app for more monitor-specific HDR controls. Download the on-screen control app from the Mac App Store. Connect your LG Thunderbolt monitor and use the app's interface to disable HDR directly. The on-screen control app provides a user-friendly interface for adjusting LG monitor settings, including HDR. Finally, make sure both your macOS and LG monitor firmware are up to date for the best compatibility. If HDR re-enables after restarting your computer, ensure your GPU drivers aren't overriding your settings. This often happens with NVIDIA or AMD graphics cards that automatically enable HDR for compatibility. Also, check for firmware updates for your monitor via the LG Software Updater. Outdated firmware can cause HDR to persist or reactivate unexpectedly. Some gaming apps may automatically re-enable HDR, especially in full screen mode. Check your game's graphics settings to ensure HDR stays off. When dealing with HDR on LG monitors, it's important to consider your cable and hardware setup. HDR requires specific cable standards to function properly. HDR requires HDMI 2.0 or higher, or DisplayPort 1.4 or higher cables. These newer standards support the additional data needed for HDR signaling. Always ensure that both your cables and the ports on your monitor and computer support HDR. Using incompatible hardware can prevent HDR from working or cause display issues. When you disable HDR, your monitor's brightness and contrast settings will automatically reset to standard dynamic range, or SDR levels. This means you may need to readjust these settings manually to achieve your preferred image quality. The SDR versus HDR comparison shows the visual differences. Additionally, for users with older graphics processing units or GPUs, disabling HDR can sometimes improve overall system performance. Newer LG monitors now feature Adaptive HDR, a smart technology that automatically toggles HDR on or off based on the type of content you're viewing. Energy-efficient HDR variants are emerging to address power consumption concerns. These use lower brightness defaults and hybrid modes that balance visual quality with reduced energy use. LG's software is becoming unified across platforms, with apps that work seamlessly on both Windows and macOS for easier HDR control and customization. In the future, expect AI-driven OSDs that use machine learning to predict and automatically adjust HDR settings based on your viewing habits and content patterns. In summary, turning off HDR on your LG monitor can be accomplished through three main methods: the monitor's on-screen display, Windows settings, or macOS preferences. Among these, the OSD method stands out as the most reliable approach, working directly on the monitor itself. To ensure optimal performance, always keep your monitor firmware and device drivers up to date. If HDR remains active despite your efforts, verify your cable connections and graphics processing unit settings. Ultimately, select the method that aligns best with your personal workflow and requirements.